Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Satsang talk, Reflections on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's take a moment together and begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Divine Mother, awaken us, help us to feel thy living presence. Help us to dive deeply into these teachings, to receive the blessings this beautiful autobiography offers us. Shine a light on our path. Help us to see it and to share this light with all. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, great souls. So we're looking at the next chapter now. Is chapter 14. The title of the chapter is An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. So yet again, another amazing, really beautiful, rich chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi. As a reminder, in chapter 13, Yogananda had left the ashram for a period of time. He always had felt a call to go to the Himalayas. And what he was saying in chapter 13 is there was a bit of egoic delusion in that desire to go to the Himalayas to receive God realization. And he forgives himself by saying he'd only been in the ashram 6 months. So at that point, even though he did understand that Sri Yukteswar was a guru and his guru, he didn't fully understand that that's where he was going to receive God realization, not going away to the mountains. So we looked at that in the last chapter. And in chapter 14, he comes back to the ashram. So it begins with his return to the ashram. So I will read just a little bit from the start of the chapter. I am here, Guruji. My shamefacedness spoke more eloquently for me. Let us go to the kitchen and find something to eat. Sri Yukteswar's manner was as natural as if hours, not days, had separated us. Master, I must have disappointed you by my abrupt departure from my duties here. I thought you might be angry with me. No, of course not. Wrath springs only from thwarted desires. I do not expect anything from others, so their actions cannot be in opposition to wishes of mine. I would not use you for my own ends. I am happy only in your true happiness. Yogananda responds, Sir, one hears of divine love in a vague way, but for the first time, I am having a concrete example in your angelic self. And he goes on to say that how in what we encounter in life, and it's more common, this expectation of others when we're in a loving relationship. So Yogananda and other teachings mentions in the opening prayer, this is a prayer that Yogananda said, and it's why we often use this prayer, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother. These are ways of relating to God, relating to the divine. Friend, beloved, God. So he said that when we say this prayer, we're honoring there are many ways to relate to the divine. And it's also an invitation for us to explore for ourselves what are the ways that are meaningful for us? What makes the divine real to us? How do we touch it and experience it and know it to be true? Yogananda often said that divine friendship is the highest way of experiencing the divine. And this is an experience of that, where there's such a purity of love that there is no expectation. He said in friendship, and I would say he was definitely speaking of divine friendship, that in friendship there's no obligation. We choose that consciously because we resonate, right, with those that we call our friends. There's something in it of free will, in the highest sense of divine friendship, I would say. Whereas with father or mother, that's not necessarily true. Within a family setting, sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes the father or mother relationship is beautiful, and because of that, relating to God in that quality is very easy. But Yogananda, even though he often spoke to God as Divine Mother, right, that was his way, primarily of speaking to God, was as Divine Mother. He says that a lot, the feminine reflection of the divine. Still, he emphasized the power of divine friendship, and he tells this story of Sri Yukteswar being absolutely selfless in his love for Yogananda. So as you might remember, if you were here for the talk in chapter 13, or if you've read that chapter, Yogananda poses the question. He does ask his guru, is it okay if I leave? The guru does not recommend it, but he doesn't say more than that, okay? Because he's not imposing. He's not imposing his will or his way, or even his understanding. He knew it wasn't the right choice spiritually for Yogananda, but he also knew Yogananda needed to discover that for himself. It's extraordinary to have that kind of support where we are able to find our way and feel that as we find our way, there isn't judgment or criticism about it. It's one of the things I have really deeply valued in my life are individuals who bring to me that kind of love and support. I would say, I consider it a rare gem. I do. I consider that kind of freedom in support to be a rare gift. I have had it in my life. I do have it in my life. I hope I never take it for granted. And part of my practice is to offer that to others. As a teacher, one of the things I've really valued about Ananda and the teacher trainings I've gone through as a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, we don't have a training for a minister. What happens there, Swami said, someone asked one time, what is your training for ministers? And Swamiji said, and this is the practice within Ananda for someone becoming a minister, being invited to be a minister, is that the other ministers, other teachers, other people, what they observe, other leaders, what they observe is a quality within the individual that an ability that when they're going through a challenging time, it does not obscure their service to others. So they're still able to be serviceful and sensitive and compassionate to the needs of those around them. That's a quality. So what Swamiji said is when somebody has that quality, then that would be the training, right? That would it's more than anything a reflection of where they are. It has to do with Dharma as well and calling, but it's a beautiful way of talking about how to be in that role. And that's what Swami Kriyananda, that was his way. And those who spent many years with him, who had years of experience, I had a little experience, I'm grateful for it, but those I know, my teachers who've had many years experience, had many years experience with him when he was in the body, said it was consistent, that he really was there to serve. That was his intention. Asha tells a story where she doesn't say I'm sure it's fine that she doesn't, but she doesn't say what she got into within herself. But she said she got off track and she was in a bit of a mess. And so someone went to Swamiji. He was in seclusion, so he was in silence. right? And someone got word to him that Asha needed help. She needed counsel. So he sent word to her for Asha to come and speak with him. And Asha tells the story that she went to see him, and she really felt badly about interrupting his silence and his seclusion. And she said that they had this exchange where he would type on his typewriter answers. He'd type a question, hand it to her, she'd speak, then he'd type an answer, and they back and forth. So they did this for, I don't know how long the conversation went, until it was clear, probably to both of them, that Asha was realigned, reset. She had what she needed to be out of the mess, right? How to proceed out of the mess. And she was leaving with an apology, right? So it's all settled, all fine. And her parting words to him were apology. I'm so sorry to have disrupted your sadhana, your seclusion and your silence. I apologize for that. And he she said very strongly and sternly, come back in, like he motioned her to come back inside. It surprised her because this was kind of leaving in her parting words. He went in, he sat down at the typewriter, wrote something and handed it to her, and he said, you insult my friendship by saying that. What else am I here for but to be a friend and to help you? And to think that you're disturbing me, that my alone time, my silence and seclusion is more important than you, is an insult to my friendship. And it was really a moment for her, which is why she talks about it, that she understood even on a deeper level what he was offering, the kind of support that he was offering. She wasn't an imposition in his life. He was there to help her. She was one of his students. And he related to her with really a quality that I hear Yogananda talking about Sri Yukteswar. There's another story. I've heard Asha tell these stories many times. For me personally, they never get old, in part because I don't think they're old for her. They're very vibrant. She's taking them deeper and deeper in her own understanding. Recently, I was listening to a talk that, again, I've heard the story before, but she was his secretary for a number of years. And she noticed at a certain point that, every day she was going, that was what was expected of her in her mind. This is her job, her role. She was paid to do it. But every time she would arrive, and she'd often arrive with a few others from the community, Swamiji seemed so delighted and almost surprised to see her and to see them. And it was surprising to her. She thought, well, I'm coming, right? I come every day at the same time. This was my job. I'm showing up. And I'm reminded of it because Yogananda is saying to Sri Yukteswar, well, if a son, right, was to leave his father's business abruptly, you would expect the father to be upset. So that's why Yogananda expected Sri Yukteswar to be upset. Like in that type of, here Sri Yukteswar is this guide, his spiritual father. And it was surprising. Oh, you're not upset with me? You don't have any expectation of me? You're here to help me and serve me in my spiritual growth without expectation? So Asha at one point said to Swamiji, you seem surprised, almost surprised. It wasn't quite that, but she was just trying to understand, and she had come to her own intuitive understanding that maybe he's responding that way because he doesn't expect her to be there. So she asked, and he said, absolutely, that's true. I don't expect anything of others. I don't expect anything of you. I'm delighted to see you every day when you come. So for her, just like with Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar, she was taking that in, and she's still taking it in. She's still understanding what is that level of divine friendship, of divine love, that is so free. It's so free. And what I would say, what comes to my mind in this moment is the discernment about all of that. I know someone at Ananda who's been there many years, one of the founding members. She had an interesting relationship. She loved, I'm sure still loves, I know that to be true, Swamiji. And very often, I saw recently where she wrote about this, and someone else was, when I was early on in Ananda, and learning things, right? Someone shared this with me, and it's, I often pay close attention to these kinds of things where I have a feeling. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the chapter where it talks about this intuition. There are moments where I can have an intuitive feeling, pay attention, right? You're receiving a teaching right now. And someone was telling me about this individual and just commenting that this individual often wrote to Swamiji for support, often reached out to him to have a private meeting, and did not receive one. She lived in the community. He gave private meetings to others. For years, this happened. And no explanation, no, here's why I'm not meeting with you. It was hard for her, right? It was hard for her. She would see him. He was always loving and kind and supportive to her. The teacher was saying to me that what this individual came to understand is that she was too quick to ask for guidance outside herself. And Swamiji was not supporting that. So he wouldn't give her guidance. She would ask questions, he wouldn't respond. And she had to keep going back within herself to find the truth within her. And she really did come to know that. Recently, I was reading something she had written, and she touched upon this. And I was reminded because I'd heard this story many, many years ago. And the teacher was saying to me that Swami is intuitively guided in what he does and his responses. So you could, in this case, I was on a pilgrimage. He was in Assisi at the time, and I was on pilgrimage with, I think it was about 90 other people of Ananda. I didn't live in the community. They had opened up a few slots for people who didn't live in an Ananda community to go on this pilgrimage. It was an amazing experience. And I had some deep questions, deep life questions, which is why I went on the pilgrimage. So she was letting me know, she was encouraging me to write to him specifically, but letting me know you may not get to see him. I mean, there's 90 people here. Everyone would love to have a private meeting with him. So she was tempering my own expectations, but still encouraging me, reach out. I recommend you reach out. And as it turns out, he did meet with me. He did say, I will meet with her. And we had a meeting. My one and only meeting with him. To this day, I was profoundly grateful then. A friend of mine, it's in a box somewhere, but it comes to mind in this moment. A friend of mine, he and I were outside. It was before one of his talks. And a friend happened to walk by and take a picture of it, and she sent it to me. She said, I caught this, which is very moving. So I'm saying here about divine friendship and divine support, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit towards the end of the chapter. So, because it talks about intuition and it talks about divine guidance. I think I won't jump there yet. We have time. I have a little bit of time, so I'll wait. Let me finish with this. Let me kind of move through the chapter as it unfolds. So this first part of the chapter is Yogananda's realization of the quality of divine friendship he's being offered from his guru. And he's amazed by that, right? And so he makes a point of it. So then later in the chapter, he talks about meditating, right? Practicing meditation. And there's a couple of ways that he says this. He goes on, a few mornings later, I made my way to Master's empty sitting room. I planned to meditate, but my laudable purpose was unshared by disobedient thoughts. They scattered like birds before the hunter. Mukunda, this was his name before he became Paramhansa. He was given the name Paramhansa Yogananda. Mukunda, Sri Yukteswar's voice sounded from a distant inner balcony. I felt as rebellious as my thoughts. So Yogananda said he ignored him. He heard Sri Yukteswar calling him, but he thought, I'm meditating, right? Why are you calling me? You're always telling me to meditate. Here I am meditating, and now you're disturbing me. So Sri Yukteswar called him a few more times, right? So then Sri Yogananda says to him, "Sir, I'm meditating." And he said this, he said, "I shouted protestingly." Sri Yukteswar's response is, "I know how you're meditating." My guru called out, "With your mind disturbed like leaves in a storm." Right? So he said, "Come to me," right? So, all right, Yogananda, then he realizes, okay, he's caught out, is what he said. And he goes and joins Sri Yukteswar on the balcony. So then there's this experience, profound, incredible experience, where Sri Yukteswar says to him with such compassion and such, he says, comfort and consolation, you did not receive. He acknowledges you went to the Himalayas, but you did not receive what you were looking for there. So again, no anger, no rebuke. And he said, I will give it to you. And he gives him an experience of God realization. And it is extraordinary. Extraordinary to read. I really recommend that you consider reading this chapter to hear him talk about the phenomenal capacity that he experiences, transcendent experience, where he can see through walls. He can see 360 degrees. There's a phenomenon, and I'll talk about what he also says about this, but it's, he experiences cosmic consciousness, right? He experiences being part of everything that is, and he can feel the breath within the grass. He can feel this extraordinary connection where what normally is limiting for us within a physical body, within our 5 senses of sight and smell and hearing, all of that vanishes. And he suddenly has a capacity to see and hear and be in relationship that is phenomenal. And so he has that, and he describes it beautifully. He follows that by talking about a poem he later wrote that he includes. And the poem is called Samadhi. It's a famous poem that he wrote about cosmic consciousness. So it's another way to tune in. And he recommended, Yogananda recommended, that we memorize this poem. It's quite long. So, but even sections of it can be extraordinary. And it's something quite powerful. You can read sentences and meditate on that. Like, what is that? And again, it's extraordinary. So he talks about this. It's remarkable. And then suddenly he comes back into his physical body and the limitations of his body. And it's unpleasant because he's been so expanded in his awareness. And then suddenly back in his physical body, only seeing with regular eyes, hearing with regular ears, back to the confines of the 5 senses. But because it's so remarkable and he's still feeling the profound grace of it, he starts to drop to the knees of Sri Yukteswar in gratitude. And he said Sri Yukteswar keeps him standing and says, stay standing, and gives him the guidance to be careful not to get drunk with ecstatic, let's see if I can find those words exactly. I don't know if I can, so I'm just going to say what it is. Like to not allow yourself to get off balance with it, because you can see I can see as I'm reading it that it would be very easy to do, very easy to get off balance with divine experiences. And they're so elevating. So part of what Yogananda talks about, and it's again a very famous and well-known passage where Sri Yukteswar says to him, come, let us sweep the balcony. And he's teaching him in that moment this balanced living. Yes, that part of the journey here is God realization. This is a path of self-realization. The journey toward that is a balanced journey. We want to be careful about that. To be able to tap into these states, to experience them, to receive them fully when they come, and not lose ourselves in them, because that state alone is not the full liberation of self-realization. I mean, it could happen, but generally speaking, it doesn't happen like that. We have experiences, we receive grace and blessing from them, we balance them in our regular life, whatever that looks like, and continue on our journey. Yogananda emphasized a balanced life, and he learned that from his guru. So after that, he talks about, he said he comes to his guru, and he said, sir, I want to know, when shall I find God? And Sri Yukteswar says, well, you found him. What do you mean? And then he says, I'm sure you're not imagining some personage, some person up on a cloud. I think you can't possibly be imagining that's what God is. But then he says, oh, I understand. You're imagining that spiritual powers would mean that you had found God. And that is not so. So then there's a caution about it, that spiritual powers, which absolutely can come from our practice, our spiritual practice. Many saints had them, certainly masters have them, but not to confuse power with God realization, not to be distracted by that. And then Sri Yukteswar identifies two things to look for to know when you have found God. And the first is bliss. That's the first. So in meditation, joy. Right? Any experience, doesn't have to be in meditation, can be any moment in life. Right? One of the reasons that Yogananda emphasized happiness is he said that, we are seeking the bliss of our own nature. We are hungry for that. We're thirsty for that. And we look for it outside ourselves in many, many ways. The path of yoga and all true spiritual paths are a journey back to the inner bliss of our own soul nature. So when you touch that, when you experience that, which was also part of the experience he was given by Sri Yukteswar, and it had continued for him, which Sri Yukteswar knew. That's why he said, you have found God. What are you imagining you don't have? So he corrects him to say, the bliss that you experience, that is God. That is God realization. Every time you touch that, you are touching the nature of God, and you are expanding through touching that, right? That's one thing. The other identifying characteristic of God realization is intuition. And that's why this is towards the end of the chapter when I said a moment ago, I'm going to jump ahead. Divine guidance is something that comes to us. These two qualities come from our spiritual practice, actually being able to know within yourself that your highest self, which is God, is guiding you. You can feel and know that guidance. And Swami talks about three characteristics of intuition, one of them being joy. Joy, clarity, and calmness. He said those are the three characteristics of intuition we look for to know, is this divine guidance? Or am I coming up with this? So I'll leave you with that for this week, to be looking within your own life for when joy has come to you and when guidance has come to you. And when those things, it becomes clear, are together, right? A sense of touching, experiencing the divine, and feeling that you can rely upon this relationship in your life to guide you. And that's what that was the story that teacher was telling me earlier, that the one woman, she learned in Ananda from Swamiji. Like he knew she was touching God, and she needed to develop her intuition because she had it. She didn't need him to tell her what to do. she would know within herself what to do. So I offer that to you, great souls, today as your own practice. It's great to be with you, wishing you a beautiful day, beautiful week. Many, many blessings.